I'm here with Rob Pincus, a professional trainer, author, and consultant. He's the owner of the ICE Training Company. Let's get started in a conversation with Rob Pincus.
When it comes to defensive shooting, the first thing you got to do is have a good gun. You got to have the right kind of gun, a gun that's simple to use, a gun that's reliable, respond with their training kicking in or their training not showing up. And we weren't seeing a lot of people drop into the Weaver stands and double tap in defensive shootings, even though that's what they were doing on the training ranges quite a bit through the 80s and 90s. So it really required a reframe, and some people made that leap and some people didn't. There's some people who are still teaching the same thing that was being taught in 1985 here in 2017. And it's real simple. If your dentist was still using 1985 techniques, or if your doctor was still treating your serious ailments with 1985 technology and knowledge, you probably wouldn't be really happy. Well, gunfighting is no less life and death. And in fact, in the moment, it's more life and death than just about any dental or medical procedure you could be going through. So the idea that we don't evolve, that people aren't critical of it, it really comes down to laziness and complacency. The fact is, most people never have to use their gun. Most cops never have to use their guns. And because you never have to use your gun, you don't have to challenge what's working on the range. And, I say the range is like a racetrack. The way you drive on a racetrack is very different from the way you drive on the street, right? Even the way you set your car up, the tires that you would put on. If you want to set lap records, if you want to win races, you don't take your daily driver. But if you need to get your kids to and from school and sports practice and back, and you want to go buy your groceries and go to Home Depot and go hunting, like your dad did to get that deer, you don't take a race car. And
Sure.
if you try to go with a race car, and if you apex those left-hand turns, and you don't worry about oncoming traffic, and you don't worry about people pulling out of their driveways, you're going to die, or you're going to lose your license, or something bad's going to happen. And since we don't really get tested with our guns, we can go to the range, which is a racetrack for guns, perform at the ultimate highest level of our ability using techniques that are tailored to drills, using equipment that's tailored to competition or tailored to the range. It's not maybe not as robust, right? That F-150 or that Honda Civic will get you through stop and go traffic and drive at 60, 70 miles an hour on the highway and take you on the back roads. And you can deal with some inclement weather. You can deal with, 4 kids in the car, or a trunk full of groceries, or a pickup bed full of hunting supplies. But the race car won't do that. And if you try, it's going to be really inconvenient, and it's going to be ham-fisted, and it's barely going to fit. You might pull it off, right? You might be able to get the kids. I'm sure I rode in the hatchback section of my dad's early
Sure.
80s Corvette more than the Transportation Safety Administration would like. But that's that was the reality back then.
What was he going to do? Get rid of an early 80s Corvette? I mean, no, you're going to make that work. You don't get rid of that car.
But it's got to be the third car, right? It's got to be the third car in the garage. It can't be your primary vehicle, and that's the thing. So guns, if your primary and only everyday carry gun is the gun that's going to win the USPSA Open competition, you're messing up. I've stood on the range with some of the best shooters in the world and seen what happens when you put standard ammunition into the tuned gun and it doesn't run. You don't want to have something that sensitive for carrying around the mall when you're going to the mall with your kids. On the other hand, that's exactly what you need if you want to excel on the range.
Sure.
So combat focus shooting was an outgrowth of that difference, seeing the difference between what was happening on the range and what was happening on the street. Now, you also have to put it in the perspective. In 2002, we had very few combat veterans actively running around, at least from my lifetime. Right now, today, you can find scores and scores of kids in their mid-20s who've had 2 or 3 combat deployments and seen real action overseas and like that. So the word combat has become a little bit loaded in a way that it wasn't 15 years ago. If I could go back and sort of redo that, we would have called it, defensive focus shooting or dynamic focus shooting. And we've used those names a lot in our collaborations with some law enforcement agencies and instructor development I've done for agencies here and abroad that don't want the word combat. Some of our big corporate partners use dynamic focus instead of combat focus when they bring the program into their ranges, national chains and things like that. And that's really where the evolution we've made is to refer to the program as an intuitive defensive shooting program. Okay. And we really refer to it as the combat focus shooting methodology. And it's a methodology that works well with what the body does naturally when you're fighting. We don't really care if you can shoot better standing up perfectly straight, because you're not going to stand up perfectly straight in a fight. We don't care if you can be a 2% better fighter by having your strong leg behind you and your weak side leg in front of you, because you can't guarantee that that's going to happen. And if you train to that standard all the time, then you would be off balance when you're neutral or when your strong leg was in front. So we take concepts like that and we marry it to the context of the fight, not shooting at 30 yards or 21 feet all the time, but close in 9 to 15 feet is, the best data we have coming out of the Range Master School in Memphis, where they've, I think, done the best job of collecting information on real personal defense shootings as opposed to law enforcement shootings or anecdotal information that we've looked at before. And it's not 86+% of shootings occur between 9 and 15 feet. So if you're not practicing between 9 and 15 feet to fire multiple rounds into the chest as your default, I don't know why, because that's what would make sense. So we build the program around what human beings do, built the program around the statistics as we see them, the most likely events, and we build them around the engineering and the operation, the reliable and robust operation of modern defensive firearms. And that program has evolved, dramatically over the last 15 years.
Cool. Can you take us back to, you mentioned, is it Valhalla? Is that how I pronounce it, or am I pronouncing it? Valhalla. Yep. The origin kind of story. Take us back to the way that connected to your current, how that kind of evolved into your current school, that experience morphed into this experience.
So when I left law enforcement in 2001, I was working as an adjunct for several different schools and kind of teaching some of my own classes, doing a lot of work in the law enforcement community and the executive protection community. And one of the schools that I was teaching as an adjunct for was Executive Security International, ESI.
Okay.
And ESI out of Colorado was invited to come check out this building to see if they potentially wanted to rent the building or maybe even, buy into the facility in southwestern Colorado. And at the time, it really wasn't open for business. It was operational in the sense that the owner and some of his friends would go up there and shoot, and they planned on having it as a recreational amenity, kind of like a Disneyland with guns kind of thing, a 360-degree interactive, reactive, target-filled shoot house with lights and smoke effect and all kinds of cool stuff, mannequins, 3D targets, really way ahead of its time in some ways. But because Tom Foreman, the guy who built it, kind of every time he went to the NRA or he went to some other, organization that was supposed to help build ranges, when he said when he described what he wanted to do, he kind of got like, you really can't do that. That's not the way ranges are built, whatever. To a certain extent, they were right. Like when I got there, it wasn't necessarily a safe place to do what we eventually ended up doing because of the way that steel targets were set up and the angles and the way the building was built, in a very, very controlled setting, such as a recreational experience where you walk a guy down a hallway, he's going to turn to the right, and there's going to be a target 20 yards away, and you can very well predict where those bullets are going to go. Then it was good. And then you'd walk him through that hallway and into another room, and he'd shoot in another direction. So the effect was a 360-degree event.
Right.
But the reality was you couldn't stand in any given room and just fire rounds in 360 degrees in all planes and not risk injury, right? Or round escaping the building. So what we ended up doing was redesigning the building a couple of times and switching the all frangible ammunition, so we didn't have to worry about ricochet and skip, and we created a true 360-degree building. But going back to 2002, I was there as part of the ESI team running an executive protection tactics course, and the owner of ESI declined investment or rental opportunities and just kind of said, that was fun, that was great, but I don't think there's enough value for us to invest in it. He didn't see the potential, I think, being good enough for what they were doing. And they went back to their dirt berm that they were training on for years and still continue to do great work there. It's a great school. And guns and tactics really aren't a big part of executive protection work anyway. So it made sense that from his perspective, it didn't seem worth the investment that the owner was looking for.
A cost benefit thing.
Yeah, so it's it's investment versus benefit, and so both entities were doing what they were doing really well, or had potential to do it really well, just not necessarily together. Meanwhile, here I was in the middle of it, and I hit it off with the owner. I ended up writing an article. We mentioned SWAT magazine. I wrote an article in SWAT magazine about what this building was supposed to be, and I compared it to the legend of Valhalla, the idea that you would feast all day at this 5-star restaurant, bar, lounge, spa, beautiful rooms. You'd have this I should say, you train all day at the facility up there, this realistic training facility. And then at night, you would go down and have your feast and your banquet and have really relaxing rooms and this high-end resort. And that's sort of the legend of Valhalla, right? Train all day, celebrate all night in preparation for the great war between good and evil. And so I wrote an article and I compared the facility, which was just, the shooting center at Elk Mountain Resort, to the legend of Valhalla. Well, in communications and after the article came out, the owner ended up changing the name of the place, and he changed it to Valhalla Shooting Club. And in the conversations about me renting the building or him hiring me to run the shooting club, we came to the conclusion that, yes, I would run the shooting club and I would move out there, but I'm not interested in running a recreational facility. It has to be a training center. And at least as long as the resort was trying to be developed and built, and during the weekdays when resort traffic was down, I wanted to offer training as realistic as possible as we possibly could to as many people as possible who are interested in personal defense or the armed use of the professional use of arms. So fast forward to 2004, when I had my first interaction with 10th Group Special Forces. They were, of course, they're based in eastern Colorado, and they south central on the eastern side of the mountains. They came over and said, "Hey, cool. We heard this was a cool building. I'm paraphrasing, but we'd love to rent it." And I basically rolled the dice and said, we're not in the building renting business. We provide training. Why don't you come through some of our stuff, come through some of our classes, see if we add value. If we don't add value, then I'm all about supporting your efforts and giving you access to the building, but I'd love to talk about whether or not we can provide some blocks of instruction as well. They sent some very senior NCOs through our extreme close quarters tactics class. I had been doing extreme close quarters stuff coming out of the law enforcement realm since late 90s, early, right around 2000, 2001. We had a program that involved unarmed defense with getting to your firearm in a worst case scenario. It was originally developed for SWAT guys. The idea that you're running through a house, most of the time you don't shoot somebody, but you have to put people down, wrestle people, put people in cuffs, all that stuff. And you're carrying all this gear, and you've got a rifle, and you've got a handgun, and you've got all these other tools. And yet we were doing our defensive tactics without any of that on, right? Like in sweatpants on pads. And then we were doing our shoot house work, all geared up, but almost always shooting. So that what was missing was what happens if some guy that you're about to put cuffs on starts wrestling you and your rifle's banging around and you've got a pistol in a drop leg holster, and we have to be able to fight to the use of our gun, and we have to be able to protect our gun in that environment. So the extreme close quarters tactics course then grew into private sector and regular patrol officers and executive protection guys. And it was really the kind of the centerpiece of the work I was doing back then. The combat focus shooting program was young, but our integrated unarmed and armed work was very mature by then. And so by 2004, we knew we had a great program, and we invited the Army guys to come check it out, and they just kind of were floored by it. We don't do that. We win a lot of fights, but we're also very much on balance and aggressive. We don't really plan for what happens when it all falls apart, when someone gets inside of that in this specific of a way and in this arena. When CQB, you go past an open door and some guy spider monkeys you and he's inside your muzzle, just really wasn't a part of their training. There wasn't a formal block of instruction that those guys had for that at the time. So we created what it came to be known as the Extreme Close Quarters Counter Ambush Program. It was a 5-day package that featured I don't know, maybe there were 20 blocks of instruction, 15 to 20 blocks of instruction throughout the week for each individual or each team. And about half of those were run by my staff and I, and about half of them were run by their cadre using our facility. And that program then grew. We ended up with a sole source provider contract. We were identified as the premier close quarters training facility available to the government in a white paper by the Rand Corporation. For about 4 years, we had a great relationship with the Army side. The Navy side jumped in. We started doing instructor development for the SEAL qualification trainers at BUDS, certifying them to teach the CFS program, which led to me writing a book, which led to the growth of our instructor development program in the private sector. And that's why to this day, most people know us for the CFS program, not for extreme close quarters, because we really didn't promote that as much in the mid-2000s to the private sector. We kept that inside the public sector, the armed professionals. And I still do an extreme close quarters tactics every once in a while. I've done a lot of work with Craig Douglas. Craig Douglas is really known for that now in the private sector. He started teaching that in the private sector in the mid-2000s. He had been working inside of law enforcement prior to that, teaching that more from an undercover narcotics kind of, you're inside of a vehicle, extreme close quarters environment. Very different from what we were doing, but came to a lot of the same conclusions. He came up with some great ways to describe it. He's a great kind of scientist of description, I think. And we've collaborated on a lot of DVDs and worked through PDN, and we're certainly buddies and friends. And he does a great job of teaching that stuff in the private sector now. And we just don't do it as much because our focus is somewhere else.
Cool. Super helpful. So you just mentioned PDN, the Personal Defense Network. Maybe tell us a little bit about what that is.
Personal Defense Network is I call it, it's kind of like the voice or the conduit for information that we've built over the last 12 years.
You don't mean the show The Voice, right?
No. It's not like The Voice. It's the voice for not only my information and for me, but for a lot of great instructors like Craig, Mike Seeklander, Mike Janet, Shalasando Padavane. We've got this year on the tour, we've got those guys, Caleb Causey doing medical stuff, Andrew Bronca doing legal stuff, Aaron Israel, Derek Poole, Barrett Kendrick, a lot of my lead combat focus shooting instructors doing different things. What we try to do with PDN is certainly it's not just Rob, it's not just ICE Training Company, it's not just combat focus shooting, because we don't cover every aspect of personal defense. And even some guys like Mike Seeklander, who primarily does defensive shooting stuff, as do I, he and I probably are aligned 80-85% of the time. That last 10 or 15, 20% that's different isn't antithetical. It's not, he's not doing things that I think are just completely ridiculous or wastes of time on the range. And I assume that because he's aligned with us, he doesn't think I am either. We just do things a little bit differently and maybe describe or explain things a little differently. So there's a nice complement there for people who are looking for a couple of different perspectives on defensive shooting, working with a guy like him, or in the extreme close quarters world, working with a guy like Craig. I really don't see what we're doing as competition. I think we push each other to be better, and we help each other to be better with our different perspectives. And then you got a guy like Caleb Causey who's doing medical work. I don't teach medical stuff. You got a guy, I'll talk about it. I can help somebody with, how to use a tourniquet or whatever, but it's not, I don't run medical classes. Andrew Bronco with his legal information. I can speak to what you should say to the cops after a shooting, and I can talk about whether I think you should follow the law or not in terms of how you own guns and where you carry guns. But Andrew's the guy with the law degree, and he's the one that is licensed to practice law, and that's what he's built his business around. So bringing in specialists helps us to have a more comprehensive approach to personal defense. Personal Defense Network started as a DVD training DVD series in 2005. We were partnered with Guns and Ammo magazine first. Second Amendment Foundation was our next branding partner, and most people know us through the NRA because we produced millions of DVDs were sent out. If you were an NRA member between 2007 and 2012, you almost certainly got one of our DVDs at some point. One called Shooting in Realistic Environments, or the straight up combat focus shooting fundamentals DVD was distributed through the NRA as a preview. And if people liked it, then they could buy the DVD, and we'd send them another one every, 25 days, 35 days, 45 days, based on marketing research and data and all that kind of. The NRA is amazingly good at profiling their members and figuring out who will buy what and who wants what. That's kind of what they do, right? They take advantage of that, and I took advantage of that to get my information out. If they want to sell something, rather than sell a crappy video or sell a silly hat or a bag made in China, how about we sell them good training information? And the NRA can make its money, and I even made a little bit of money. Which when someone comes to you in 2005. And, you've been in the industry less than 5 years full time. And 97 was when I consider myself really starting in the industry. That was my first SHOT Show. But in 2005, when somebody comes to you and says, we're going to send one of your DVDs to every NRA member, you want to be part of the project? You say yes. You don't really read the details of the contract, and you don't even care if you're getting paid, because if my opinion is, and this is what PDN is great about, all the free information we put out with PDN, and for our collaborators, our other instructors that we have contributing, if the information's good, people are going to show up to your classes. People are going to go to your website. People are going to buy your book. People are going to want to be affiliated with you and buy your hat or your t-shirt or whatever it is. If the information's bad, then you better make your money selling that DVD, because they're going to watch the DVD and they're never going to spend another dime. For me, I believed in the information, and I didn't care how much, if the NRA was making most of the money, so be it. Just get the information out there. people will show up to classes, or people will ask for more. They'll buy the book, whatever.
Yeah.
So that was a huge marketing opportunity as far as I was concerned. But we produced 112, 110 DVDs over the course of about a decade, about 12 years. We shut down DVD production pretty much completely, started to cut it off in 2015. It was completely shut down as of 2016 because people just aren't buying DVDs anymore.
Right.
Personal Defense, we saw that coming. Personal Defense Network as a brand was started as a website in 2010. And in 2012, we opened up our premium memberships for additional information, more information. We now have a gold level of membership where we have private discussions and private live events just for our gold members. And that project really has taken the place of the DVD. So now we have hundreds and hundreds of videos and articles from me and the other contributors that some you have to pay for. A lot of it's free. You can go to personaldefensenetwork.com and see a lot of those videos and articles. Literally hundreds of free stuff, hundreds of clips that are free. And then the premium side, you get full-length streaming DVDs. We have, excuse me, we have full distance education classes. You sign up for the class for $30 or $40 and you get 8 to 12 hours worth of work, videos to watch, downloads, worksheets. Some of them have tests. You can take an online test and earn a certificate of successful completion for those classes. And we're not teaching somebody how to shoot over the internet necessarily, but we can teach them how to pick a handgun. We can teach them about the neuroscience and physiology and anatomy that underlies the way you should train and what you should train. We can teach them about medical concepts and the use of medical gear. Hands-on training in person with an instructor is always going to be better.
Sure.
But if you got to spend $300 to go spend a day with Caleb Causey and learn how to use a tourniquet and a chest seal and pack a wound and all that stuff, that's a lot different from spending $30 and spending 8 to 10 hours with Caleb through a virtual learning process and getting 60, 70% of the information and the value. You still have to do the reps. You still have to do the physical stuff on your own. But I think the idea that we can, for 10% of the cost, none of the travel, none of the, quote unquote, inconvenience, sacrifices of missing work and all that stuff, and 10% of the cost, we can give you 50 or 60% of the value in terms of the information and the knowledge. I think it's huge. So I'm really excited about our distance education program at PDN. And, we're at here 2017 and we're continuing to grow exponentially every year in terms of our membership and our web traffic. We've got some great partners that sponsor our training tour. So we're still out there doing live training. I'm in the middle of the 2017 training tour right now. This year we have 12 instructors on the tour teaching 106 classes in about 30 states. And I personally will be in over 20 states teaching. I've taught in about 13, I think, so far. And, lots of those small states up around New England and the Mid-Atlantic, I can hit all those in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, sure.
Now that over the next couple of months, I'll add, I think, 8 or 9 states to finish up in Washington with Mike Hughes up at Next Level Training. I'll finish up at his range in late July. And then we've got other instructors crisscrossing all over the country, hitting a bunch of other states and covering a bunch of topics that I don't cover.
Sure.
So the tour has been really important to us because it helps us tie what we're doing on the ranges and in the classrooms to the Personal Defense Network brand. Before 2012, that was just, we were all out teaching independently and contributing articles and videos back to the big brand. Now we're actually doing live training under the big brand too.
Cool. Yeah, I don't mean to lead this, but you just hit on something that I have a guess about, and I want to just explore it real quickly. Did you get any pushback when you started to move your content primarily online and start specifically the distance education bit? When you started to do that part, did you get any pushback from the people saying, people will stop showing up to your classes if it's cheaper? And have you actually found the reverse to happen, that people might do that, but then you actually get more people there? I'm guessing, and is that clear?
There's a few aspects. First of all, it's absolutely where you guessed correctly. People, like I said earlier, you put out good information, people are going to want more, and they're going to take the next step. So what Mike Hughes, I just mentioned him, the developer of the CERT pistol. One of the things he talks about a lot is lowering the barriers to entry. Right? Sure. Making it easier for people to train. So the laser training may not be as good as live fire, but if we can make it so that it's not detrimental or wasteful, and people will pull the trigger more often and do more training and think about training more, then maybe they will end up at the live fire range more, even though you gave them a laser pistol. That's the logic, right?
Sure.
And so it's the same thing. If I put out a DVD, or I appear on a TV show, or I write a book, that doesn't make it less likely that people are going to show up to their live classes, right? It makes it more likely, because those books, not only do those books educate the tens of thousands of people who will never spend the money or time to go to a live fire range, either because they don't want to, or they can't afford it, or whatever.
Sure.
That also will entice some hundreds of people a year to come take classes with us. So, and it's the free article or the Facebook post. I do a lot on social media. The Facebook post that I make about selecting a defensive handgun makes people curious about what else I might say. Or maybe I'll just say, I got to shoot this new gun from this company today. Here's what I thought. And if it resonates with them, if my thoughts resonate, they may care what I say about choosing defensive handguns in general.
Sure.
So what? They read a free article. Then there's a link to a free video. Then they find out there's more information if they become a premium member, and they spend $12 to start their first annual premium membership at PDN. And then they watch the premium information. And then they find out I'm doing a live class, and they become a gold member so that they can see the live class about me with 15 handguns and what's good and what's bad and hand fit and why these three are probably the best to choose from, but you got to find the one that fits your hand. And then they go through that, they buy the gun, they go practice, and they watch the drills and they do all that stuff. And then they finally get to the point where they're like, you know what, I want to go take a class. So it may take 3-4 years, but along the way, they've been upping their commitment to the information.
Sure.
So that's one storyline. The other storyline is the people, unfortunately, who will say things like, well, you can't teach people this stuff online. You're it's a scam. It's snake oil. They need to come to a class to learn. Well, I mean, that's like saying you have to, get on a steamship or you have to, be with Christopher Columbus to go learn about the new world. We have encyclopedias. We have the internet. We've been publishing books and DVDs for over a decade. The idea that somebody can learn and not actually have to be in your presence or actually physically doing something with you is pretty well established. When Harvard Medical School is doing classes on neurosurgery for doctors through virtual and distance education, I think we can handle teaching somebody how to use a tourniquet. Sure. With a professional like Caleb communicating the information with our production value, good video, good lighting, good close-up, and with the downloads of, here's the worksheet, here's the questions and answers that you need to be able to successfully give the correct answers to prove that you own the knowledge. We can make a dent, and we can certainly make a $39.95 dent in your learning curve and make that worth your time and worth your money. Some of it's just sour grapes, guys that don't have a machine or a build production ability or even, the ability to talk to a camera to create distance education. And some of it's just ignorance. Guys just don't know what they don't know. And to them, they have this mentality where if you're not standing in the room or standing on the classroom, you're not really getting anything out of it. Sure. And that says more about them than the professional education community on earth, and we have to pull some people kicking and screaming into the future.
Can we take a little sideline here, just a curious thing. Is there a reason why you chose an ancient Trinitarian image as your logo?
Yeah, there is. There's a funny story. I did not have a logo. When Valhalla Training Center shut down, it was sort of unexpected. There was inside the family that owned the building and owned the resort and owned a whole bunch of other things. There was some infighting about who controlled what and that kind of stuff. And at the end of 2007, with about 3 weeks notice or a month's notice, Valhalla Training Center was shut down. Yeah. The resort continued to operate for about another year. Valhalla Shooting Club officially operated for about another year, and then the whole project shut down and was mothballed. Meanwhile, I was left with a busy training schedule and a whole bunch of, commitment to train military teams, private sector, all that, and no home to do it at. So I had to sort of spin up, take ICE LLC, which was the background company, and put something out in front of everybody. So ICE was integrity, consistency, and efficiency. And we just did a DBA ICE training company. Yeah. And that was going to take in all the contracts and the money and all my intellectual property. Sure. I owned the trademark for combat focus shooting, all that stuff. So we just kind of moved it. Right. And I had some contracts coming up with the Navy that made it Virginia Beach a great place for me to be because I was using some facilities there. At the time, the facility that most people know as Blackwater was operating under the name U.S. Training Center and was kind of open to the public again and was renting ranges. So I was able to rent a bunch of facilities there to continue the training on the Army side, bring the Army teams there instead of up to out to Colorado. So I set up base in Virginia Beach. Meanwhile, I didn't really have a logo because I never needed ICE to be like a public thing. So there wasn't a brand or a logo or any of that. And I was at a training conference. I was teaching at the really cool thing. It was a law enforcement training conference that occurred in Manhattan every year for a number of years. And it was like the only place you could go in Manhattan and see like guns at a trade show and stuff.
Sure.
It was kind of cool. It was law
like,
enforcement.
am I in Manhattan? What's going on here?
Right. Yeah. We were in the Javits Center, right there on the Hudson. It was kind of cool. And I enjoyed my time in New York. So we were all out to dinner that night. And there was a woman there who started like kind of like whatever you want to say about like the stereotypical New York, Long Island accent, woman in her 50s or 60s. Right. I'm from New Jersey. I get it. Like not the most cautious person socially, right?
Sure.
So she started just hammering on this logo this guy was wearing on his shirt and how it was a horrible logo and and like it turns out like his daughter drew it on a napkin and he made it his company logo and like so she ran a graphic design kind of PR advertising firm and I said, you know what, I'll give you $1,000. I'll tell you what, you're so good at logos. I've been for 6 months talking to graphic designers and people about a logo for my company. I'm going to tell you what the idea is behind it. You come up with a logo, I'll give you $1,000. Like, how much you normally get for a logo? She's like, I don't know, $500. I'll give you $1,000. You come up with a logo by the end of the week. And I told her, I said, we try to combine the ideas of integrity, consistency, and efficiency. They're the tenets, the foundational principles of our programs, of kind of my business life and all that. And talk to her about what I meant by those three things. And it was kind of a neat dinner conversation because everybody sort of talked about what they meant by integrity and all that. And I said, but I don't want any guns. I don't want crosshairs. I don't want bombs. I don't want, big dogs with teeth, like nothing tactical looking because it's an educational company and we operate in a lot of realms. At the time, we were still doing a lot of team building for team development, really, for international, multinational corporations. So I needed it to be a versatile kind of can fit in anywhere logo. And sure enough, like 4 days later, she sent a triquetra with a circle, wrapped around it. Where is it? It's over here. That guy.
Yeah.
And I said, all right, you pretty much nailed it. And wrote her a check for $1,000 and got all the graphic files. And, here we are, I don't know, a decade later or so. I go, well, that was probably 2009 or late 2008 when that happened. So, yes, it was late 2008. So we went about almost a year without a logo. And then that conversation happened and I ended up with a great logo. And we've got plenty of guys running around with the tattoo and patches and stickers and all kinds of stuff. So
yeah. I mean, it's a great image for sure. Another sideline thing that I'm just asking. I'm glad I asked the last one because I was just curious about it, and it turns out there's a good story there. So I don't know if you're following in the news. Did you see the thing in Tennessee? Their decision with regarding silencers. Did you see that?
No, it's new. No, not
okay.
No.
So so Tennessee, I can get a first reaction then. So Tennessee just silencer, suppressor, whatever you want to call it, right? So Tennessee just did a thing where they're basically saying we're not going to prosecute regardless of what you do with the NFA. It's a state thing. You just buy it, whatever. And I'm not obviously I'm not a lawyer. I'm not talking legalese here.
Right.
But similar to what's been done with marijuana and other places, they're like, we understand what the federal government says, but locally we're not going to send our officers after you, that kind of thing.
I think it's great. I think that's how it starts. I'm a resident of Florida and my business is based in Florida. I spend a lot of time down there, but I also off and on since 2002 have lived in Colorado and I have a house out there too. So I'm very familiar with sort of the states' rights, individual freedoms, libertarian aspect of the legalization of marijuana there. And I've said for a while, it's going to take probably 10 or 12 states to do what Colorado did for the federal government to have to change their mind, change their position on marijuana, or crack down or try to say, no, you don't have the right to do this and go against the states that are doing it. I think it's not going to go that way. I think that the federal government will change their position. Meanwhile, it creates some awkward moments, right? Because you can't put the money into a federally insured bank. You can't use credit cards, all that stuff's going on out in Colorado. So you got millions of dollars in cash being moved around like in the back of a, Jeep Cherokee, and it's just, instead of like just using a credit card and depositing it and collecting the taxes and all that stuff. And I think it's only a matter of time before the federal government changes their mind. Meanwhile, the federal government has said we're not going to have ATF agents prosecute in Colorado or in these other states. Right. So that's good.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, DEA agents.
Yeah, I understand.
Meanwhile, the ATF has said, BATFE has said, but we still consider marijuana a federal narcotic, and you cannot say you don't use an illegal drug on your 4473 if you use marijuana legally in your state, but it's illegal federally. So I've always thought that was weird. I mean, if you go to Amsterdam and you do a drug that's legal over there while you're on vacation, and you come back 2 days later and you want to buy a gun, were you supposed to all along have said, yes, you used a drug illegally because that's federally illegal in the U.S.? And I guess the argument is, well, you were outside of the jurisdiction of the U.S. then. Technically, when you're in Colorado, you're still inside the jurisdiction of the federal government, but your state says it's legal, and it's causes problems. And the big uproar isn't the recreational user. Obviously, it's the medicinal user. So if someone truly believes there's medicinal value and they get a medicinal marijuana card, that is now being taken as de facto evidence of use. And you're not supposed to legally be able to buy guns, even where medical marijuana is legal. So it's created this whole, I think very disturbing and troubling situation of a conflict between individual rights, state rights, and federal law. So with that as the background, I'll be really curious to see how it plays out in Tennessee. My daughter lives in Tennessee. My son-in-law lives in Tennessee. My daughter actually went through her concealed carry permit class last year with a suppressed gun because she was 10 months that's not 10 months pregnant. It was in October, the 10th month of the year, and she was about 7 months pregnant and didn't want to shoot. Sure. But she had to take the test within a certain amount of time of her 21st birthday. Right. So I got a friend who teaches the CCW classes there, and Jerry at Hilltop Training Center, give him a little shout out. He ran her through a CCW class with a suppressed gun. Now, if I could have given her $200 and she could have gone and bought her own suppressor and had one, and then they would have it for home defense use and all that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the timeline doesn't allow for that though. Right.
Well, no, but I'll tell you what, if what we're saying is that at the state level now, they're going to allow suppressors manufactured in the state of Tennessee to be sold across the counter without any special hoops, without any NFA. She's coming up here this weekend with my son-in-law. We're going to hang out at my dad's here in Michigan. I don't mind handing her $500 and sending her to the Nashville Armory and say, if that's what the state's saying, sure, cool, good for you. Now you have a suppressor in the house, and you don't have to worry about the hearing issues and all those things when you're in the house. If you want to go out to the range and shoot, you don't have to worry about the hearing protection. I think suppressors are a huge benefit to the shooting population. I've hunted in England using a suppressed rifle,
which is crazy when you think about the gun restrictions in Europe and in England in particular. But anyway,
But over there, it's considered. It's like, how would you not hunt?
Right. It's impolite, right? Yeah.
Well, it's actually. I mean, you're gonna lose the right to hunt on a lot of that land if they've got supersonic cracking rifles all the time, bothering the neighbors and bothering the people all around them. Now, here in the U.S., we don't think twice about it. You go out in the third week of October in West Virginia and you go hiking, you're going to hear gunshots going off all around you. The first 2 hours of the day, the last 2 hours of the day, and every once in a while in the middle of the day. So it's not something that's unnatural in certain parts of our country, but I guarantee you there'd be more people hunting in New Jersey, there'd be more people hunting in New York, there'd be more people hunting in different areas of the country where there's more dense population if we had more suppressors on the hunting side. As far as home defense, the advantages are obvious. As far as, I'd rather have hearing damage and stop the bad guy. So I'm not saying don't shoot unless you have a suppressor by any stretch, but if you could have a suppressor, all the better, especially for the family members and the kids you may be shooting around, stuff like that. So I'm all for suppressors. I think they make sense in a lot of situations. I don't think they're a must-have. And I personally don't think it's worth jumping through the hoops that the government sets up as it is right now. But I'll be watching what happens in Tennessee. I think that's great. I think if 20 more if 10 more states did it, it might push that whole get rid of the NFA, or at least the Hearing Protection Act. Might push that in the right direction.
Cool. Great comments. Thank you. Can you update us on the Avidity Arms project?
Yeah, Avidity Arms project is really it's sort of on the downhill now. It's we're definitely coasting. There was a lot of this in the beginning. Starts and stops and fits and what's the team and where are we doing this and how much of the production are we going to do in-house versus outsourcing? And excuse me, that took a couple years. Meanwhile, in the background of all those big business and manufacturing decisions, the gun development was chugging right along. Now we're at the point where the design is done, unless something, surprisingly fails in the production version of parts. The actual, we're ordering 6,000 at a time now for 6,500 now for our first production run of 6,000. So we've got a pile of this part. We got 6,000 of those, and we've got 6,000 of these over here, and 6,000 of those pieces over there. And it's just a matter of getting 6,000 of everything together, and then. Because if you're not, what I've learned a lot about manufacturing over the last couple of years. We can make one gun work really, really well. We might be able to make five guns work really, really well. But if we have to hand fit and hand build all the guns, they're going to cost $3,000, not $500, right? And that's the problem. That's why you see a lot of companies out there that might only sell, 500 or 1,000 guns a year, but they're selling them for $2,000 or $3,000 each, and they're being hand built or hand fitted, and high end 1911s, things like that. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to sell, 5 years from now, we want to sell 50,000 guns and have a rifle and a shotgun and a couple handguns and all that in our line, right? So in order to set those manufacturing capabilities up, we have to know that we can call a source or hit go on a button and get 5,000 of a part that can be put together with 5,000 of another part and 5,000 of another part, and they're all going to work well and reliably, and they're going to be easy to assemble, and we can put a gun out there that's a quality defensive firearm at an MSRP of $499. So that's harder than just building a gun that works, and that's a lot of people don't get that. I wouldn't have really understood the nuances of that as well as I do now 4 or 5 years ago. So I know there's like people are like, oh, this gun's never going to be real. Well, the gun's going to be real. The gun is real. It's just a matter of making it real on a mass production scale, right? We're really close, and probably I would be shocked if I'm not shooting a production gun for testing from all production parts in June, which if we do it in June and if everything works the way we expect it to, that could mean production guns being released to distributors in July. So we're that close now, and if something goes wrong, it could be an 8-week delay. If the barrels from our source of our production barrels don't do what they should do, well, that resets the clock 8 to 10 weeks, and we're back to October, right? But if everything goes well, it's. I've told people I'll be surprised if the gun isn't released while it's still hot, while it's still summer time. Yeah. if there's snow on the ground in more than half of the U.S. When the gun comes out, I'll be surprised and disappointed. I really think we're going to be able to do this in a matter of just a few months.
That's great. I'm sure you've answered this question someplace before, but with everything that you have going on with ICE, this is another project that would have been a world unto itself. That it would have been plenty to be the only iron in the fire. What motivated you to cross into that world of design and manufacture?
Opportunity. Like so many things in my life, it's just been the opportunity was there, so I took it. I had some friends who were interested in potentially, we had all talked about, gee, we wished we were making ARs too, in 2013 when the crappiest ARs out there were still selling for $1,000, when there was just a run on the market. And lots of companies stood up real quick and like, oh, we're building ARs too. And some of them were good and some of them weren't. And some of them were never delivered. They said, oh, we're building ARs, order them from us. And then they never showed up. So there was a lot of drama at that time, and we sort of sidestepped it. It was a good conversation one night over drinks at SHOT Show or EWA or NASGW, wherever we were. And we walked away from that, but still in the back of some of our heads was this idea of, well, wait a minute, what if we were going to start a manufacturing company? And so a couple of friends came back around, and they had the resources. They had the distribution at Eagle Imports. They've been distributing guns for 30 years.
Yeah.
They had always, apparently in the background, they had talked about, well, we really don't want to be tied to international. What if we looked at distributing a U.S. manufactured gun, or what if we just decided to start building our own guns? And there's some advantages that people,
Sure.
can figure out real quick of being an importer with a tie to a foreign company and also having a manufacturing ability, because now some of those guns that can't be imported, you might be able to manufacture here under a licensing brand for those foreign companies. So Eagles always have been doing that, but that really wasn't the way they wanted to launch it. And so the opportunity and the willingness that they had to back financially, and then on both ends, right, invest the money, and then also have the distribution model, because that's, for me, I don't have millions of dollars to invest in a gun manufacturing company. And even if I did, I'd be like selling them through Facebook. I don't have a distribution model for guns. So I'd have to find these resources and then invent this part of the machine, not just design a gun.
Right.
And that's what and if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I wouldn't have told you I was ever going to design a gun. I figured, maybe I would do more of the projects. I've done a few of them, and like most top level instructors do in the industry, they put their name and logo on like a different color version of an established gun, right? And you can go look at all the 1911 limited editions that have been done, and some of the revolver limited editions, and there's a special SIG out there, a special M&P out there that have the logos and names of instructors, and maybe it's got a special set of sights and a special color, but it's not really any different than the standard M&P. And those are cool and fun, and you can make a little money, and they're good marketing, and it's fun to be associated with those companies. But it's not designing a gun. It's not having your own gun.
Sure.
So this opportunity was unique. It was huge as far as I was concerned. And it was something I didn't even really know I wanted to do until I found out I had the opportunity to do it. And then it was like, no looking back. Like, let's do this. This makes sense. And if that project had failed in the first 6 months or year, I probably would have then gone out and found the resources and found the investors or found the partnerships to make it happen, because I became pretty passionate about it. Mm-hmm. So that's really what it was. It was some guy saying, hey, we're ready to do this. Do you want to be the guy who designs the gun or guns as we move forward? Absolutely. Let's do it. And it was a napkin sketch, and then it was a list of specifications, and then it was working with the engineers to make those specifications and kind of that wish list real. And Brad Thomas has been our lead engineer on the project, and he speaks engineer in his way, and I speak gun design in my way. And that was like sometimes like this, but more often like that. And Mike Sedini over at Eagle was kind of like, whoa, guys, we're all on the same team. We can figure this out. And it's been fun. It's been interesting. And I've learned a lot about manufacturing and engineering. And I've learned that I'm not good at the patience and the detail level that engineers have. But I'm getting better at sort of stepping away and letting that work itself out. Like, I don't think I've talked to anybody in the company for probably 5 days. I've been teaching almost every day for the last 2 weeks. But I think it's probably been 5 or 6 days since I had any actual conversation about when is this part coming in or what's happening with this, because I've learned that at this point, it really is sit and wait for me. I have to wait until someone puts a gun together and hands it to me. And there's not really much I can do except wait until the next gun to be tested shows up, and
sure.
That could be next week, and that would be great. It could probably be 3 weeks from now. And the less I think about it between now and that 3 weeks, the less annoying I am to everybody else.
Well, sorry about that. I'll stop talking about it.
It's important to talk about it. I am excited about it. It really is. It's just like, when that vacation is coming up in 5 weeks, but you're at your desk and you got to get this article done. Like, if you're thinking about, Costa Rica, you're not going to get your article done. And I got classes to teach. Like you said, I got plenty of irons in the fire. That Avidity project is there. It's important. It'll be big some week this summer, but this week it's not a big part of what's going on.
Sure. Well, that's awesome. It's a good update, and I appreciate it.